Appreciate it. And I'm going to kind of let us introduce you kind of as we go here. But for those of you that don't know, like you and I work together down at Kinetic Pro, and obviously since I've been away, I've seen it. Really what you guys have grown down there, what you've grown down there, and just super. I'm super proud of just having been a part of it. It's in the year and couple months that I was there, and how awesome it is to see you guys grow and what you're doing down there, and it really helped me. It put me on a good career trajectory. And I probably wouldn't have had some of the opportunities that I've had without having the knowledge that I was able to learn down there. So, and we'll kind of get into some of that and how we ended up meeting each other and how the genesis of KP came to be. But let's start off. Well, first of all, we appreciate you being on here. But let's start off with you kind of just giving us what your title is and what your day-to-day role and responsibilities are at Kinetic Pro.
Yeah. So I'm Casey Mulholland. I'm the founder and lead developer at KP, Kinetic Pro. Everybody calls it KP, so you hear me say KP throughout the whole thing today. But day-to-day responsibilities now, still work the floor, still work with our pitchers from time to time, not quite as much as I used to. Most of my operations today are in our software, our overall development of our program, so kind of coordinating the communications between our S&C, our pitching, and then our partners who, we've got a lot of teams and different groups like Wake Forest that are using our software now. So I do a lot of virtual stuff, a lot of coaching online, just setting groups up to make good recommendations around what we do.
So I guess I probably should have maybe asked this better too. I mean, what is KP? What is Kinetic Pro? What is your guys' kind of your mission statement, and what's your, you mentioned working with like Wake Forest, and so I know you work with some other like travel ball teams and things like that down there. Like, what is the benefit of them working with you guys, and what kind of services do you guys offer?
Yeah, so I'll give you our mission statement. It's innovating pitching tech and philosophy to impact the next generation. And so our focus is really on trying to, impact the injury, the pandemic that is in baseball today with our tech and with our philosophies. We've designed a lot of things from the tech space. We've also, developed some philosophies now that are uniquely ours. And, we work with everybody from pitchers in-house at KP, which we see, upwards of about, today we're seeing about 300 athletes a year, 300 pitchers a year specifically. So we just work with pitchers. It's also something unique about us. So just 300 pitchers a year. We have a remote base now of roughly, we do about 40 to 60 a month is where we're at from a remote standpoint. And then we have our partners, and they use our software platform that we've developed. So we have a custom software platform that runs a lot of our philosophies and tech. Groups like Wake Forest, who've worked with Michigan, Iowa, a lot of pro guys like Nick Martinez and Nate Pearson, a lot of those types of guys over the years. We do about 36 professional athletes in the off season, so full-time professional training as well. So that's sort of who we are.
And kind of just to give everybody an idea, I think we met in probably 2017. We were both at another private gym that was somehow famous in Tampa, but horrible at the same time for both sides. But and then you were kind of running KP out of that facility, and then you moved over to Clearwater, and we kind of moved into Tampa. But at that point in time, just to give everybody kind of a background, like you mentioned, you guys have upwards of 300 athletes at any given time now. We had in multiple, whatever, 20 to 30 to 40 remote guys. We maybe had 4 to 5 consistent remote guys and maybe 15 to 20 consistent guys and a handful of pro guys that would bounce in and out. So it's just awesome to see the growth and what you guys have been able to kind of put together. I want to definitely get into a little bit of your backstory, because I think that's helps everybody understand like what your mission statement is and why that kind of the genesis of KP came to be, especially from the not just the pitching side, but really just trying to save people from injuries and overuse and things like that. And we'll probably get into some of that at the end, hopefully talking about youth travel ball and how crazy some of that shit is. I'm pretty sure I think it was yesterday. I literally saw you put a post up about how wild it is that people are, it was either you or someone else that we both know that like put up a post about throwing 4 games in a weekend. Like you wouldn't ask a pro guy to do that. Why were you asking like 13-year-old kids to do that? But anyway, not to get off track, but give everybody your background. Obviously, I mean, I've mentioned to some people that are on here, you obviously played it in the collegiate level, you had the opportunity to play professionally, and then you dealt with some injuries. One of them, which was big out of your control, getting line drived in the face. But kind of just go back and really give them the background of you and how basically you as a player transitioned into the genesis of KP and what it is today.
Yeah, so at a young age, I'll start off with about 16 years old. I was at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. That's where I went to high school. So everybody knows IMG today is this mecca of sports. Back then, it really wasn't. It was more like portables and a couple fields and whatnot back then. But I went through my high school career there. We had a unique opportunity to get to a biomechanics lab when I was about 16 years old. And I had this coach tell me I threw 90 miles an hour at 16 years old for this guy. And he said, if you don't fix your mechanics in 2 years, you're going to have Tommy John surgery. And I didn't really understand sort of like what that meant. And I kind of just brushed him off. He wanted me to pay a lot of money to train with him month to month and fix my mechanics. And sure enough, within 2 years, I had Tommy John surgery. I was supposed to be a first-round draft pick out of my senior year of high school. I was one of the top 30 players in the country. And I was playing against like Bryce Harper, Manny Machado, Jameson Taillon, a bunch of others, and mentioned amongst those names. And so anyways, had Tommy John surgery, missed the draft. And for those of you who don't know much about the draft, that's like $1.1 million at the age of 18, 17 years old. Would have been life-changing. Ended up going to college. And because I had Tommy John surgery and that guy's words kind of came to fruition. If you didn't change your mechanics within 2 years, you're going to have Tommy John surgery. I started kind of really getting into sports science and looking in and making cold calls to people, trying to like figure out like what is it that hurt me. And so I got to Ole Miss, wasn't quite right and didn't pitch very well. That summer I went off and played summer ball and started kind of finding myself a little bit again. That summer I got hit in the face with a line drive and ended up reconstructing the left side of my face. So I have like silicone down the left side of my face. And that kind of was just another setback, another challenge. Got to junior college, pitched really well again. Had a bunch of scholarship opportunities and offers, and ended up taking one of them to USF because it was close to home and a lot of exposure. I really just wanted to play pro ball. Ended up getting a chance to play pro ball with the Dodgers. First season in, got a couple innings through things. I was moving up pretty quick in the org and ended up blowing up my rotator cuff. So I got back home and really, again, kind of was continuing to ask these questions year over year and start to learn more and more about what was out there and finding people that were, interested in sports science like I was, just kind of learning. I didn't even know what it was called back then. I knew it was like technology and biomechanics, and I didn't really have a name for it. I just was interested that, in finding somebody that had the answer to my questions. So when I got done playing, when I tore my rotator cuff, I knew I was done playing, but I wanted to, close the book. I wanted to close a chapter on my life and put baseball in the past and move off into something else. And so that was about 2016, and I got involved in a lab in Bradenton at IMG called Notice, and a guy named Ben Hansen there, basically started allowing me to come by once a week and ask a million questions. And so that was 2016. 2017, I started training a few athletes. This is about the time that Adam and I met, and started training a few athletes. And I again was asking Ben questions and trying to learn about workload management. We had, for the first time, I was using sensors like wearable technology to track throwing with guys. And then it kind of just dawned on me one day, like, oh, this workload management thing totally makes sense. It's about how much you do and how strong you are and how good your mechanics are. Like, there's like a 3-part system here, and workload's sort of the head of that for health. And I looked back over my career, and I could literally, pinpoint. I could look at areas of my career that, my workload was really bad. Not saying that's why I got hurt, but just where my workload was really bad. And I kind of opened Pandora's box for myself and started really getting into the tech and really getting into new philosophies and designing programs and protocols. And, that's what sent us on a 5-year journey and ultimately landed us where we are today. It's been a lot of fun, and the build-up's been unique. But yeah, it all stems back from my story. And I realized that, the guys that I was training sort of at the end of all of that, those guys were guys that I could help. And I just felt like I had value in my ability to impact, the younger generation and maybe do something good for baseball. So that's sort of where we are today.
Yeah, and obviously I met Ben. Where is he at now? Is he still in baseball at all?
Ben is the Chief Technology Officer for the Mets.
Okay. Which is not surprising. So I met Ben, and obviously we had some good discussions. We talked about workload and biomechanics, and back when they were using the motor sleeve, which I know that's not really the same thing anymore that's being utilized now, but similar idea. Kind of, and you mentioned basically the three parts: the biomechanics aspect, or just the throwing mechanics aspect of it, the workload management, and then obviously the training and the recovery and all that kind of aspect. The stuff that to an extent the athlete can control a little bit more. Sometimes the coach controls the workload more than the athlete does. Sometimes the coach is also controlling or not controlling the mechanics. It just kind of is what the athlete ends up doing. So can you kind of just really, again, because we got people in here that have never played baseball, can you like let us know like what each of those roles, like just a quick little definition. I mean, you don't have to get into the specifics of like pitching mechanics, but basically what it means, what kind of value it has, what things can and can't be manipulated. Same thing with the workload, really what workload is, the acute to chronic ratio. And then maybe we'll save the strength training and stuff for a separate question. So maybe just focus right now on the biomechanics and then the workload management.
Yeah, so at KP we have two like pillars, I guess you could say. We have protect and perform. So when we look at athletes, we're talking about two things. We're talking about protect and we're talking about perform. When we talk about protect, we're talking about workload first, strength, and then mechanics. And that's maybe counterintuitive to what a lot of people in the industry want to think, especially when you hear parents at Little League games and stuff. You hear them talking about mechanics. And if your mechanics are bad, you're going to get hurt. I'll explain that in a second. But from the perform side of it, we flip that. We make mechanics first. That's our first point of focus. Then we have strength, and then we have workload. So workload is also playing a factor in your performance. So if you guys think about like running, for example, you want to be at peak readiness to run a marathon. Like you don't want to like go into your marathon day exhausted or fatigued. Obviously, that's not going to be the most conducive way for you to put up a good time in a marathon. And so it's the same thing with throwing. Like we want to make sure that we're at our peak readiness and ready to handle the load that our body faces. So when we talk about protect, we're talking about a pretty simple equation. We're trying to protect from injury. So it's the equation for injury for us is when load is greater than tissue tolerance, we see injury occur. And so our focus is not increasing load over tissue tolerance. We want to make sure that we manage the load and that we kind of have an awareness of what that tissue tolerance looks like. So we have kind of two parts. We've created two products that help us understand that and kind of dive a little bit deeper. We have our KP bands, which is a shoulder testing protocol. And this is specifically for the shoulder. What we do is we basically look at force output from the athlete on a day-to-day basis. We individualize that through some algorithms. And then that gives us a score and a readiness score for that athlete's shoulder for that day. And typically, we can't isolate a single muscle, but what we can see is if we put you in extension, for example, the lat is the main force producer in that position. Therefore, at the end of the day, we can say, hey, if that lat score is going down or if that extension score is going down, the lat's probably taxed. We've used like Naraxon EMGs to validate that and look at, we have, I think, over 40,000 tests today that we've captured over the last 4 years on that side of things. So that's from the tissue tolerance standpoint. I'll go into the workload side of it and explain kind of what our goals are there. If depending on how much you guys know about baseball and baseball throwing, some of you may not know anything at all. So I'll explain sort of the vital role. One is that Tommy John surgery in baseball is like a pandemic. It's everybody. There's something like I think it was 37% of MLB pitchers have had Tommy John surgery at some point in their life, which is a wild statistic. And so there's another statistic that shows, and a research study that shows they took, I think it was 3,000 12-year-olds. And so they were looking at 12-year-olds that were going to be in the Little League World Series or were in the Little League World Series. So guys that were, just transitioning from winning kind of their championship to move into the Little League World Series, or they were in the Little League World Series. This is, again, 12-year-olds. They took 3,000 of them. They found that 75% of them displayed some form of like early onset Little League elbow. So like the idea that they were going to have Little League elbow if they kept going. They were showing signs of Little League elbow. And so again, we have across baseball from the youngest level to the oldest level, these issues that are rising with pitchers and pitching in baseball. And so we wanted to do something about it. When you throw, you have forearm flexor muscles. These forearm flexors contract and they protect that UCL. So does your bicep, your tricep, your extensors play factor as well in stabilizing that elbow. When we throw, we have a valgus torque that's being applied to the medial elbow. Our muscles create a varus torque in response, and that varus torque has to be equal or above what that valgus torque is applied to that medial elbow. And so our forearm flexors are our front line of defense. If these muscles are fatigued, that force that's being applied to that medial elbow is not offloaded, let's just use that term, not offloaded appropriately or as needed, and more direct force is being applied to that UCL. When we look at like cadaver studies for the UCL, we see the UCL tear is somewhere between 34 Newton meters, and there's some discussion now that with live individuals we're probably around 45 Newton meters. So let's just say 34 to 45 Newton meters of stress applied to the UCL will tear it when it's isolated, the UCL alone. When we throw a baseball, we're ranging somewhere between 70 and 120 Newton meters of stress at peak output for a fastball. And so when you start to consider that, we're looking at 2 to 3 times the force that the UCL is able to withstand is being applied to our medial elbow over every pitch. This is 100 times plus as a starter in baseball, as a pitcher. And so that should give you an indication, what our forearm flexor muscles, if they're not doing our job to mitigate, that stress that's being applied to the elbow, we have a much higher risk of, starting to fray or tear that UCL and then ultimately fully rupture that UCL. So our focus with workload management in baseball right now, workload management as a whole is really, we use different models and again, depending on how much expertise you guys have or knowledge you guys have in terms of what exists out there, other sports, and they use different ways of calculating how much load your body's under in a day. You have things like TRIMP scores, and you have other various types of calculations that you can use. Well, in baseball, for the longest time, we've only used this concept called pitch counts, and so we count every pitch that a pitcher throws in a game. And so if you look at studies, like there's a study by a guy named Zemersky, and it's out of Central Florida. He's a researcher for University of Florida, and it's called the unaccounted workload factor game day pitch counts. And so Zemersky showed that if you took all the pitches in a game day, so pitchers warm up in the bullpen before the game, so they get their preparation, their warm-up throws. In between innings, they actually hop on the mound and they throw about 5 to 8 pitches. And then you have what we call pitch counts, is where they face a hitter. And so that study showed that about 57% of all the pitches in a game day are what we call pitch counts. And so younger levels, the amateur levels, use pitch counts like they're the holy grail. And so they say, Johnny should go throw 70 pitches tomorrow because he threw X amount today, or 3 days from now, et cetera. Reality is we need to track all throws. We need to track the warm-up throws you do in the outfield. We need to track the throws you make at a position. We need to track the throws that you do on the mound. We need to track the throws you did yesterday in practice. Those matter too. And it's kind of, again, this is like an intuitive thing. If you're building up for a marathon, right, you would track all of your training. It doesn't make sense why you wouldn't. You would just prepare up for marathon. But when we talk about baseball pitching, for some reason, it's been this whole taboo thing to talk about how much you should be throwing catch play wise, and you hear terminologies like listen to your arm. That's like something that you hear coaches say a lot in baseball. But with wearable technology, we've actually been able to dive in and get really into measuring everything that an athlete does. Just like I wear an Oura ring and a Polar watch because I'm a nerd and I like to collect a bunch of data from 2 different things. But in baseball, we finally kind of crossed the chasm to where wearable technology is being more openly accepted and players are using it to their advantage. And we've been one of the industry leaders, luckily, in designing throwing programs based upon this wearable tech. We've designed our own wearable tech. We're coming out with another sensor next year, which we're excited about. And so my point is, and to kind of bring this all back together, we have the load, which is what we measure right now and what we do a really good job of trying to capture on a day-to-day basis, which is the wearable tech and throwing and how much work our guys are doing. And then we also have the measurement of tissue tolerance. And again, our goal is not to let load exceed tissue tolerance. And this measure of tissue tolerance, that technology is going to keep getting better over the years. There's a lot that needs to be studied there, especially for the forearm. But right now, our main focus is on mastering and continuing to develop, how we track the load. That's something that we've been sort of ahead of the game on for the last couple of years.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of information there. And I know there's like Tyler Shorter's on here. My GA Tyler is actually not able to be here. He's actually on vacation this week, but he's going to listen to this, and I know he's probably going to have 1,000 questions about it. He's a catcher on our baseball team, so he's deals with pitchers all the time. And I know Tyler Shorter, who's on here, and hopefully he'll be able to ask a question at some point at the end, does some pitching coaching up here as well as some strength conditioning up here at a private gym in town. But a couple things going back to the mechanics, like. And honestly, I don't even remember when I left, where we kind of stood at with this, but like obviously anthropometrics is a big factor. Like if you got somebody that's a 5'9" pitcher, I can't think of the guy that used to play. He played for the Rockies for a season or two, but real short guy that was like jacked. Tim, I think was his first name, Tim something. He played with another team in the big leagues before that. He's 5'9" through 98, and then you got guys like Nate Pearson who are 6'4", 6'5", and throw 100 miles an hour. So in terms of mechanics, again, without getting like into the nuts and bolts of like all the different, like how much external and internal rotation, all the different positions of the throwing mechanics, like how much as a pitching coach can you really influence it? How long does it take to change somebody's, like if that coach that told you when you were 16, hey, you're going to probably injure your arm because of your mechanics, which again, mechanics is only a third of the equation. Tim Collins, yeah, Tyler Shorter already chimed in. It's good having another baseball guy on here. But yeah, Tim Collins, I was thinking of. You got a guy like Tim Collins who is like 5'9", but built like a brick shit house, and you got guys like Nate Pearson that are big and long, or Skeens. I mean, you see Skeens, big, strong dude, just different body types. Like how much could you have changed your mechanics when you were 16 to going into 17, 18 years old? How long would it have taken you to change it? And how much of that is just maturity, puberty? Like if you're working with a guy who's a 5-year big league vet, like can you change his mechanics at that point, or is it more important the workload becomes more important at some point? Like, I guess kind of which levers can you as a coach at KP, can you guys dictate the most? Again, keeping strength I'll have separate questions on strength here in a second, but really from the mechanics and the workload stuff, like how do you kind of manage those two levers?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to sort of what our key focus is, right? So like I said, protect and perform. So I talked a lot about the protect with the workload side of it. If a kid's struggling with, recovery or arm health, or, velocity is not sustaining, we have some guys that will hit like a 94, right? And then all of a sudden, like during the season, they'll slowly start to like fall to like an 88. And you start looking at their stuff and you go, well, yeah, because you're throwing all the time and you're not managing the workload side of it. So there's our focus on workload. And like I said, it has some benefactor to health and performance. So, but from the mechanical side of it, mechanics are really this sort of art. And I'll explain it in two fronts. So like in baseball, we have the oral tradition of mechanics, which is coaches will have passed down these little nuggets over the years, and you'll typically get a coach that walks up to a kid and says, hey, put your hands here, or make sure your front shoulder is tilted this way, and you ask why, and the answer is, well, when I was a player, that's how I did it, or I learned from this player who learned from this player who learned from that player. So you might be getting information that's 50 years old, maybe relevant, maybe not, but there's also like this correlation and causation thing that happens in baseball where some coach will come over and say something to you and you throw a really good pitch the next pitch, and the coach is like, there it is, see, that's the thing, like you did it, good job. And now there's like this this bias of like my thing works, and we should keep doing that. And so I'm actually a part owner in a company called 3Motion AI, which is a biomechanics company. So you can actually use your cell phone now. We do range of motion screens. They have like the FMS, and they have a number of other range of motion, like customized range of motion screens. You can use your phone. You can actually record slow motion video on your phone, and then submit it to the software, and it uses computer vision to create biomechanics output. And so it's 3Motion AI, like number 3. And so, yeah, 3Motion AI. Yep. And so great tool, great software, and super helpful for us and for me. And so I always talk about it. I have my experience, my playing background. And so I always talk about knowing what the player's feeling and kind of having that experience. I think it's important for coaches to sort of have this toolbox and to continue to kind of practice this art of the thing that you do. My shoulder doesn't really allow me to do it as much as I'd like to anymore, but I still try to like get in and understand and try to feel what the athlete's going to feel in it, which I think is really important. So I have this experience and this communication piece. And then I have on the other side of it, 40 years worth of research. Like, so there's been research in biomechanics in baseball for forever. And so we've been looking at, what keeps players healthy, what helps them perform better. And so we have all these correlations to ball velocity, especially. And so when we look at an athlete, I have a list, like a rank of things that I kind of like to go over. And I like to kind of tell a player, hey, you're throwing, 90 miles an hour. Like maybe we want to try to get you to 95. Maybe velocity is on the top of your mind and the thing that you need to improve upon right now. Again, that's all stuff that gets evaluated on assessment day. But we might go, hey, your lead leg, notice how your lead leg moves this way. And so you're getting too much knee flexion at this time for the throwing motion. And so we're going to try to influence that. And so I won't go into all the biomechanics, like, gradings and all that kind of stuff, because it gets a little deep and it's, obviously a lot. But I'll say this, and this is, Adam, to your question a little bit here, how do we influence it? And how much is, sort of this, we have these unique athletes. So I'll give you an example. You mentioned Nate Pearson before. Nate moves unique. Like, and Nate is not the population. Nate throws 103 miles an hour, right? He's like 100 to 103 miles an hour. So comparing Nate to, 40 years of research, well, nobody in that research is throwing 100 to 103, right? So, trying to take these norms and kind of compare them with Nate doesn't really work. But at the same time, Nate wants to continue to throw harder or whatever. And you kind of laugh. He's like, I think my goal would be to throw 105 one day. And like, he's not far off. So you kind of can't knock him for saying that. It's kind of far fetched, but it's pretty funny. Nate uniquely moves the way he moves. He's 6'6", 235 pounds. He does some things that are very freakish. He's very athletic. But my job is not to fit him into a bubble. My job is to try to help him understand maybe where we can take some shots at changing some things, but also have very well documented like who he is today. So if I have to back him up and teach him, kind of to who he was before, he knows where he's going with that. So we have this model. It's a skill acquisition model. And so it's our own skill acquisition model. We've kind of dubbed it that, which is assess, feel, and drill. And so from a coaching perspective, I think this applies to anything, not just pitching. We sit you down and we assess where you are today. And so we use 3Motion AI to evaluate your lead leg or your trunk rotation or whatever the thing is. We find something wrong. And my job on assessment day or in our assessment is to explain to you the education so that you understand what you should be seeing, the difference in where you're at and potentially where we could be. And give you a very clear picture. And I think this is really the art of communication, the art of relationship. These are all great coaching things that good coaches will get the most to explain to their players. But establishing the communication, so the education, first and foremost, the assess is well understood is key. And then we move to feel. And I like to tell about feel. So I was in Publix one time, a grocery store down here in Florida. I don't know if you guys know what Publix is, but in a grocery store down here, and I'm walking through the aisles, and this kid and his mom are in the cereal aisle, and this kid is literally standing behind his mom, and you see him looking up at his hand as he fakes this throwing motion, and he keeps looking up at his hand, and you can tell that some coach told him something about where his hand needed to be in his throwing motion. And so he's standing behind his mom in the cereal aisle, unprompted, just swinging his arm back and forth, just trying to feel, whatever this thing is. And so what he was doing was creating a cue. He's creating something that his brain is going, oh, maybe if I throw my thumb behind my head, and then, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, I'm going to try to throw my thumb behind my head on the way up of this motion. And so we had, again, this assess, which is he understands the education. Coach gave him the education. And then he has the feel, which he's naturally doing as he's walking around. So we like to give our athletes non-throwing drills, things that they can do to kind of work through that feel. We put them into positions. We talk them through kind of some ideas of cues. And then you have the drills, the last piece. So assess, feel, drill. Drills are the last piece where we basically take you as a player and we say, okay, we've got a cue in mind now for the feel. We have a cue here. We're going to try to apply that to a drill, and we use the most constrained position we can to give you a really solid feedback loop for good versus bad, and give you a better chance at success in that constrained position. And then we slowly reduce the constraint to where you're throwing off the mound, and hopefully over time you can move. We term this autonomous. So we want you to work autonomous, meaning that we don't want you to think about the action anymore. It just becomes part of what you do and how you do it. So Adam, to answer your question, how long will that take? That could take months. It could take, it could be a whole lifetime of that athlete working at that thing to kind of keep that in check. Reality is biomechanics, when we really talk about change, not mechanics in the oral tradition of pitching. When we talk about biomechanics specifically and really looking at movement, measuring movement, it's hard to influence change in a lot of guys because they have developed that skill their entire life. And so for us, coming up with a good coaching process to really influence that skill and get them really actively thinking and understanding what they're trying to do different, that's our only chance of success. And I'll say we have a good rate of changing, but not always, it's not 100%. Kids have to really buy in on that and understand how to apply it.
Yeah, and I think a couple things come to mind with that. I definitely like the assess, field, drill. I think that's a simple little mantra that is awesome. I actually this spring, one of the books that I read was How We Learn to Move. It talks about that. It basically how constraint-based learning is better, and like why just playing, like when you're 7, why just playing soccer doesn't really make sense. You'd be better off playing small-sided games of soccer of like 2-on-2, 3-on-3, because it actually learns you how to feel and pass, make good passes. Because if you ever watch 7-year-olds play soccer, or even 7-year-olds play baseball, it's literally the one fast kid just chases the ball everywhere and everybody else falls around them. So it's just one of those things where, like,
right,
putting kids in sports like that at a young age doesn't really teach them how to play soccer that well. It teaches them just how to, like, chase the guy with the ball, and that's really all it does. And that's why you see sports, when you get to the higher levels, you have, your indie period in football, and baseball will work on like individual hitting drills and pitching drills and infield, outfield, and things like that. So that's why doing the constraint-based things is important. Same with the weight room. Like, one of the things that, just to kind of keep everybody in the loop of from the strength training side, is like sprint mechanics. People talk about sprint mechanics. Well, when we get 18, 19-year-old kids that have sprinted the same way their whole lives, I'm not going to, as a strength coach, like, there's very little I'm going to do to make them a better, I'm not going to make them look like Usain Bolt in a semester. So it's one of those things where, putting them in a position where we just try to make them stronger and have a little bit more mobility and try to get more out of the technique that they already have. And you can do little, run wickets and little, sled sprints and slowing things down and things like that to give them some constraints, and kind of give them a little bit more narrow focus. But at the end of the day, just like you said, at the end of the day, they're not going to run wickets on the football field. They're just going to chase the guy or try to not get caught by the guy. So it's one of those things where we also have to have that autonomy as an opportunity for them to display the things that they've hopefully been working on. And again, I'm still going to come back to the strength stuff here in a second, because obviously I think the strength is a huge component, obviously, to some of this. Like you mentioned, like front leg, like if you don't have a strong enough front leg, you're not gonna be able to block the way that you need to and kind of pivot around that front leg. But to kind of wrap up the workload piece of it, you mentioned all the different throws. Obviously, from just picking up a ball and throwing it at 45 feet and going all the way back to 300 feet when we're playing long toss to warm up, all throws matter. They all count. What's kind of the biggest thing? And obviously I know that it's arm speed is probably the most important thing, but like how important is it that, going back to the kind of even the mechanics thing, how important is it that when a kid's just playing catch to warm up, that he's focused and he has good intent behind every throw, and he's not just lobbing the ball to his catcher until they get warmed up. And we could eventually, I want to ask questions about weighted balls and how they can help. Again, they're kind of a potential constraint variable. But how much does arm speed influence the stress, the torque on all of those different throws that a pitcher might make throughout the course of a 5-6 inning start?
Yeah. So the way that I'll explain kind of two things that you touched on. One is intent. I'll talk about intent as its own isolated thing. I'll talk about intensity and volume as their own thing. So when we talk about somebody throwing, our system, the way that we grade out, we have an algorithm that looks at everything from the arm's movement to the arm's speed, to the individual body type. We're taking in, and as well as like time between throws, like we take in all of those variables to create our workload calculation for our athlete. But easy way to think about, like, how would we kind of create a better model than what exists today? So right now we just track the volume of the pitches in a game. If we were to look at all the throws in a game, and not just use like an RPE model, which can be deceiving, right? So we have a cool video on YouTube for our company. We looked at, it's a little study for like 20 kids, and we looked at, we told them throw 50%, 70%, and 100%. And you go, okay, well, 50% of what, their all-time PR, or is it like their like today PR? Like, is it like what would be 50%? And so we just said throw 50%. We took whatever their peak velocity was with us over the prior season. And we found that guys were like 20 miles an hour off, like what actual 50% looked like. So you start to realize quickly, like most guys have no understanding of intensity. And so our system, what it does is it basically grades out a low intensity throw to a high intensity throw. And it'll give you a lower value of work for a lower intensity throw versus a higher intensity throw. And then, like I said, we take some other variables, height, weight, time between throws, number of other factors. But that intensity factor is really the key weight to the work that we're expecting as an output for our athletes. And, I think workload will get a lot better over time on that front. But I think right now, yeah, it's just a huge step forward for us understanding intensity, understanding tracking all throws with the sensor. That's the workload standpoint. And then I want to make a note of like from a mechanic standpoint. You mentioned like sprinting, and I'll use it in the guise of pitching. But I tell guys all the time, like, just because you have perfect mechanics doesn't mean you're going to throw harder. The intent at which you do something also matters. And so if my focus is, and this goes back to the skill acquisition discussion, if my focus is, I'm going to throw this ball at, my hardest I've ever thrown this baseball. I'm going to throw a higher velocity than I've ever thrown before. I tell guys, you have to understand what intent looks like. And so think about, like, if I put you in a ring with Mike Tyson, right, in his prime, let's not say Mike Tyson now, well, even Mike Tyson now for most of us, but let's say in his prime, right? And I said, hey, Mike Tyson's going to give you one punch. He's going to say, hey, you can punch me one time. After that, I can fight you back. You're going to throw an absolute haymaker. You're going to come running across the ring, and you're going to throw in as hard as you can to try to knock Mike Tyson out in one punch, right? And that's intent. Like, that's the idea of intent. It's sort of this peak output for a very short bout, and you have to understand how to reach that upper level of output from yourself or intensity from when we're talking about velocity, or when we're talking about peaking in terms of like knockout punch. That's intent. So I'm going to take this term of intent now, I'm going to apply it to command and other skills. So we can take that term, we can say, okay, it's not just velocity based or effort based, it can also be focus based. So like when I'm playing catch with somebody and I make a bad throw, the difference in a kid who is really understanding, like throwing a baseball to the person's chest, for example, or throwing the baseball where they want to routinely, you'll have some kids that play catch and they miss, and they throw it over the guy's shoulder, and it doesn't register in their mind that was a bad throw. They just go, oh, I'm glad he caught it. Versus other kids, you see them, they miss over that shoulder, and that kid will go, oh, get the ball back to the chest, and they'll start internalizing cues to actually try to get that ball back to the chest. And so now play that out over 20,000 throws, right? Let's say like 2 seasons of baseball is about 20,000 throws for most kids. Let's play that out over 2 seasons for 20,000 throws, and that internal governor of good versus bad, that feedback loop is happening constantly. That's really the art of, seeing what players get a lot better versus what players don't. And the art of, when I say the art, I mean the art of coaching to really improve players over time, is really encouraging that feedback loop within. And so I would say this, and this kind of tie all this back together, which is when we have our workloads, so like the daily workloads, the amount of work that an athlete is allowed to do, us as coaches, this applies to weightlifting, this applies to throwing, this applies to anything where we're tracking total load for the day on the athlete. Our creativity to influence this peak awareness and output and intent, exercise to exercise, rep to rep, that's what really matters the most. Is if I can take an athlete, put them on the floor with us and say, hey, you're going to throw 20 throws today at a low intensity, but I want all of those throws to be right to the chest. Okay, now I've devised a plan where if this ball goes over the shoulder, I can help that athlete identify that's a bad throw. we need to put it on the chest. And again, now over that 20,000 throws, this athlete has a better awareness over that 20,000 throws to extrapolate, hopefully, better development from skill, whether we're actively focusing on that skill or not for that athlete. It's the idea of, again, communicating the task appropriately to the athlete. You as a coach have a huge influence on impacting the development of that player for the long term. If your tasks, if your environment, if those pieces are appropriately designed in your daily schedule. So.
No, and that's awesome, and that's again something that as strength coaches sometimes I think we, I always talk about every rep, rep integrity and every rep trying to be perfect. And obviously we don't expect we can't really expect every rep to be perfect, but the intent behind it being perfect, same with every throw. And, like when we have an athlete doing 4 sets of 5 hang power clean, like that's only 20 reps that they get that entire training session. So if they do 2 shitty reps, now they're 18 good reps that are going to get the training response that we want from. So, it's even to an extent from a training standpoint, lifting standpoint, it's even more valuable to appreciate every rep because you're not going to get as many of them as you might when you're throwing. But I think that's huge because, again, it really allows the athlete to focus in on what is the task. It's a task today, just throw this ball as hard as I can humanly throw it. And it doesn't really matter where it goes, or am I trying to throw sub-max? Because again, in a game, and I've never pitched in a baseball game other than in I guess I played like middle school, I was still a pitcher. But you can't do a max effort pull down with the same accuracy that you're throwing in an actual game to a live batter. So there has to be a give and take of max effort versus max intent and focus and kind of hitting the spot that you're trying to hit. So it's one of those things where that's all so important. And I think sometimes as strength coaches, we forget that in the weight room too, of how important, I always say that if you can't do stuff in the weight room, if you can't give me 20 perfect reps on a power clean, how are you going to go out and do 100 perfect throws in a game or run 70 perfect plays in football or whatever, or make your foul shots in a basketball game? Like if you can't have that same mindset with those little things, it's going to be really hard. So obviously I feel like I could ask even more questions on the workload stuff because I think it's so important. But I do want to get to a little bit of strength and conditioning stuff, and then I want to talk about the bands, the apps, the app, and some of the stuff that you guys are doing, and then a couple maybe quick questions at the end. So you have the workload, and you have the biomechanics, and then you have the strength aspect. Again, what's the most valuable thing there from a strength development standpoint? Obviously, relative strength is probably huge, not necessarily absolute strength. Because I'm going to beat Nate Pearson. He's going to beat me in absolute strength all the time because he's just bigger than me, but my relative strength might be higher than him. So it's one of those things where for him, relative strength is probably actually more important. But it's one of those things where, how important is strength? Obviously from a strength conditioning standpoint, that with you guys go down, have that down there. What are some things maybe where you see athletes, baseball pitchers, what do you see some things that they're lagging in from a strength standpoint? That's like day one, like we have to address this. It might be a mobility issue, not even a strength issue. It's probably hip internal rotation a lot of times, trunk stability, things like that. Where does the strength piece play into it? And then kind of what are some of the big rocks that you guys are trying to fill down there from a strength development standpoint?
Yeah, I'll address it, and it might seem a little vague when I express it. So I can, I don't think we're gonna have time to go truly into the weeds of like the algorithm that runs it, but we actually have a strength score that we've developed now. So like you've had things like tonnage, you have things that are measurables of like expressing like what is strength, and so we wanted to go a little bit deeper in that, and so we took into account the actual biomechanics of like each individual movement that we program. We looked at the potential like set rep scheme, tempo of each of those exercises. And so we went in and reclassified all of these individual pieces. And we also took into effect the athlete's individual body type. And so when we assess somebody, we're actually giving them a starting point, a score. And assessment days are unique because they're just a snapshot in time, right? So if this kid pitched yesterday and he comes in for an assessment today, reality is like he may lack internal rotation or external rotation. He may lack, strength in a certain rotation strength in a certain movement, or he might lack a certain rotation because his body is going through a recovery cycle. And so very rarely do you have an assessment that happens where it's, just a clean static 1 day assessment to really understand who an athlete is. And so we took that into effect. We use our range of motion, we use our jump testing, a few other variables. And we do that to get a baseline, a starting point, a place where we feel comfortable conservatively to say this is where this athlete should start on this program. We give them a value. So let's say it's like the athlete starts off at like a 35. What we found, athletes can go up over 100. We've had very few that get there. But our goal is to progress our athletes in our strength conditioning program progressively over time, in the same way that our workload works on the throwing side of it. We actually correlate those two pieces together, right? I don't want to tax a guy in the weight room and I'm pushing him really hard on the throwing side as well. That's just a recipe for disaster, and ultimately the numbers probably aren't going to be very good. So we have to value strength and throwing and understand how strength impacts the skill. And you have to have great communication over the lines, which I think is, oftentimes something that doesn't happen enough. Getting a plan from the pitching coach. Hey, this is what we do. And then, hey, this is our plan in the weight room. This is what we're doing. Oftentimes we're planning around seasons, but, pitching coaches can call laterals, and they decide to put a guy in a velocity phase out of the blue. And you're like, all right, well, that's going to change the phase that I had in terms of a strength development standpoint. So I would say this, that like what we found in our strength protocol was that athletes that expressed a 57 strength score and were 200 pounds were more likely to throw 90 miles an hour. It doesn't mean they're going to throw 90 miles, it just means they're more likely to throw 90 miles an hour. So what we got to is we defined at least what our goals are in the weight room as a staff, is to say, hey, listen, we're going to push this kid in here. If he starts off at a 30, our goal is to at least get him to a 57 and get him up to 200 pounds, depending on obviously the size, et cetera. But that's our goal, and that's a good spot for us to feel comfortable with this athlete and make some individualized adjustments. But how we make that happen is the unique part. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the skill acquisition piece, because I do want to touch on something I think is really important and a perspective that we've kind of openly discussed, maybe a little controversial, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into it anyways, because I think it's valuable. I tell people all the time, when you look at a coach, and you look at like guys that push the front line of things in coaching, you have really great programmers, or you have really great coaches, and we all tend to lean one way or the other. And it's just kind of what we like. Some guys are more introverts and they love programming and they love studying the idea of programming, the numbers, and man, if I switch this tempo this way, I'll elicit more of an adaptation this way. All of that's great. And then you have some guys that just love the coaching. They're maybe more extroverts. They're guys that are on the floor. You're hearing the rah-rah guy, right? The guy that's screaming at over the music and is getting the group going, and all the guys are fired up and they love the guy. They come high five him every day, the whole thing, right? We all kind of we all have maybe a vision of maybe one or the other that we've experienced in our lifetime. And I say, we're usually one side or the other of that. To push greatness, I mean, to change the industry, and if you're going to be, if you want to change programming structures and you want to like create something new in programming, you have to devote every ounce of your time to the idea of physical adaptation and reading about anatomy and change of the body and studying the set rep schemes that you implemented and modeling that on a computer model and all of that. From the coaching side of it, the same thing. Like you have guys like John Wooden and great coaches in sport and great coaches in the weight room, and just throwing out names, right? But we can all think of a great coach who influenced us, who's a great friend, who encouraged us to push a little bit harder on a daily basis, or who you'd go to bat for. We say that about teachers as well. Like, man, I really learned a lot from that person, because you showed up to class every day and that person had some energy. They got the most out of you. They connected with you in some way. And there's an entire art to that as well that is studied, that is, people devote their entire life to. So when you talk about writing books, imagine yourself writing a book about one or the other. Like, you're going to have to devote every ounce of your energy to one side or the other. So I always tell people, like, hey, if you want to be great at something, like, pick one of the lanes and recognize who you are as a coach. I'm not saying that every coach needs to go one way or the other. I'm just saying recognize who you are and that you may love one more than the other. And that's good too. But that you might need somebody in your space that complements you and allows you. So if you're a guy who's maybe more introverted and you're more focused on the programming, maybe you find a player on that team who is the loud guy, or maybe one of the coaches on the staff who is loud, and you allow them to bring energy into your space and you give them a role. Maybe if you're the guy who's not so focused on the programming or the anatomy focus, maybe you offload that to somebody outside of the program to give them the ability to program for you, and you bring that energy and you connect that with your programming structure every day. But I bring that back again to the idea that we're really trying to influence change on the floor. We're really trying to scale athletes' skills and to get the most out of them, like you said, get the most rep out of rep by rep in this process. For us, we've recognized if we want to move somebody up our strength score, it takes us influencing them daily in a number of ways, not just from a program structure, but also from a vastly deep connection and coaching structure as well. I think you muted, Adam. There you
go. All right. I think that's great, and I do agree with you in the sense of, and I've been around it. I think you see it a lot, especially in like the sport coaching world. I mean, you definitely see it in strength conditioning too. I can think of that guy. I think he was at Oregon. Now he's at Florida State. The guy with the bow tie mustache or whatever. I mean, he's just kind of a hype guy. Who knows if he's actually a good strength coach? He's just a hype guy, and you need that. Like that's not me. I'm not the big hype rah guy, but I can get guys motivated and get that intent out of them. And that goes back to the throwing aspect of it, of like the intent behind it. Like that's where people use like the velocity based training stuff for weight room. Like that's great, because that's a way for you to show the athlete, hey, you moved the barbell with the highest intent, and the weight goes up, your velocity is going to slow down, but we still want you to have high intent. Lighter weight, we still, velocity is going to go up, but we still want to make sure that you're having a high intent, you're competing. And that's where like jump testing and sprint times and things like that are so important, and stuff that we do, stuff that we did there. Obviously I'm still doing here. Like we test something every single week here with every one of our sports. We're testing vertical jump, broad jump, sprint time, something every single week, because I think it's so valuable, again, from are you going the direction that we want you to go? And it just kind of validates whether we are or we aren't. So I agree. I 100% agree on that. Man, I have so many more. I mean, I think I sent you this document. It's literally like 2 pages of questions. I want to try to be as concise as possible here. So maybe with this, I'm going to ask you questions, and let's maybe do like 1 or 2 sentence answers, so we can try to like rapid fire some of these questions. All right.
Yep.
What's the biggest things that have made guys that you've gotten from that come in as high schoolers, young college guys that have maybe made it to the next level, or maybe made it to a level that they normally wouldn't have made if they wouldn't have interacted with KP? What is some consistent habits or characteristics that those athletes have?
Just showing up every day. I mean, to be honest with you, it's just it's the guys that don't show up here enough. They don't have that success moving forward.
What has probably been like through this whole process of KP? What has been maybe the biggest struggle that you've had, you personally and as a company? And then like what have been on top of that, and kind of in that same frame, what has been the thing you feel like you guys have gotten the best at since my time there to now? What has been the biggest struggle, but also then, and it could be the same thing, but it could be 2 things the thing that you guys have really capitalized on the most?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest struggle for us, we've had some really innovative ideas, and we've built some really great things, and we've had a lot of people steal those innovative ideas and great things. So this space is very competitive in terms of the sports tech space, and we've had a lot of people, they want to be your friend. They have a lot of money. They have deep pockets. They don't ask questions. They steal it. They tell you to sue them later. So it's something that we've learned along the way. The thing that I feel we've done the best at is we haven't lost our morals and all of that. We've been very true to our passion, our mission statement, which is, look, I still care a lot about kids. And at the end of the day, if workload management gets out there and our models get shared and people get to do what we do and they help the next generation, you know what, I impacted the game. I'm happy about it. And I think our team is happy about that as well. May not be the most rich in the world in terms of, the monies that come in, but what, we can say that we can hang our hat on saying we accomplished the goal, which was key. So.
Okay, KP bands. I know when we were there, we kind of had the model 1.0, and now it's probably model 25.0 or something. But what is the KP bands? What's kind of the biggest? What's the why of the KP bands? And then what's the what and the how? Like how do you guys? What's the reason for them? And then what kind of benefit do they provide?
Yeah, so resistance band stuff for arm care and baseball has been around for forever. We looked at the other programs that are out there. And it was the same 10 exercises every day. And we were like, why would you do that? The same 10 exercises every day. Guys get bored, they stop doing them, whatever. We just felt that the process needed to be different. And so we found a way to evaluate the shoulder, to test the shoulder. And so that's what I was talking about before. We use 9 different tests to model the shoulder and get a score for the shoulder. And then from there, that gives us your readiness for the day. So if your score goes up and you have a really high score, that means you're more ready. That means we can throw more load at you, and we can give you tougher exercises. If you rank out really high amongst your population, your age range, we can give you harder exercises. So we're able to scale back exercise type able to scale set rep, scheme, tempo, tension of the band itself. And we give the athletes through the app a completely unique auto-regulatory, customizable, arm care program daily based upon what they do before they throw in the day. So that's the bands. It's just an arm care tool for guys to auto-regulate their overall arm care.
Did you guys work with, I know when we were down there, we were kind of doing, like I said, version 1.0. We worked with, and I can't think of his name, but he was like the PT that was in town. I forget what his name was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you guys worked with, obviously I'm sure with some of the biomechanics software and stuff that you guys have used, like what's the exercises and kind of the scale up and down? Is that something that's based off biomechanics? Is it based off regular like band exercises, or is there some unique exercises that are more pitcher specific, I guess you could say, instead of just shoulder specific?
Yeah, so all of our stuff is pitcher specific, and we actually designed our exercise library on our own. What we did was we went in and looked at, kind of common positions that guys were getting into and how to, obviously target certain musculature. The thing that we did is we found that when, we go overhead, especially Y position, kind of these more advanced positions, I guess you could say, where guys need to have some awareness of kind of how to control the scap or, how to, put themselves into those positions. We didn't want to target those at younger guys. We didn't want to target those against guys that were really weak. So we used that in our scoring system and in our age demographics. And we started to create, as you get stronger and you express that strength over a larger age, it's easier for us to say at that point, hey, you can probably handle, getting up overhead or doing something that's a little bit more advanced, so to speak. So that's the scale that we talk about from the exercise selection, is really just age dependent or strength specific, as we kind of, give you one of our 58 exercises.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the same 9 exercises that guys do, and not only do they do the same 9 exercises over and over again, but most of the time, and I've seen it, some of our pitchers here that are a little bit older and mature and have educated themselves a little bit with some of this stuff. Like most of the time, they're generating most of the movement through their thoracic spine or lumbar spine. They're not actually targeting the correct musculature that they're supposed to be. They're not keeping their trunk engaged and things like that. And that's, again, even something as simple as like a chest supported Y. People end up using their upper traps instead of hitting that lower trap, which is what it's supposed to be. And they all want to grab 10-pound plates. I'm like, no, grab a 2.5 or less. Like you don't realize like how little weight you need to hit the actual muscle that we're trying to hit. So it's just one of those things where, that's something that you definitely see in the strength conditioning world. And I know you're going to see it, in that realm. All right. So the KP app, which I know it's all tied together, how does that remote training work? Obviously, you guys are still doing the remote assessment. Sometimes people come in for in-person assessments, and then you send them off of the program. What's kind of the why and the what of the app, and then what's maybe some biggest things that you've improved on? Because when I was there, we basically were just using Google Drive, and we basically made up our own Google Drive app, and now you guys actually have like a legit app that you download, correct? So basically,
Yep.
Again, what's the why of the app? How's it beneficial? What kind of things does it provide, and what's the biggest improvement, the biggest change that you've made in the last, I guess, it's been almost 7 years now, probably.
Yeah. So the app itself really facilitates all of our training day to day. Right now it's, we have our coach's dashboard, which is a web portal. And then you have the app itself. The app has prep, lifting, throwing, bands. We lock most of that, for the public download. We lock most of that. And then we have so our bands are accessible by the public, but our lifting and our prep, for example, are not. They have to be programmed by our coach still. So some of it is dynamic, some of it's automated by the coach, some of it is not yet dynamic or automated. I'd say, our throwing module, it has very uniquely our dynamic throwing module and plans and layouts and some of our creative designs to fix things like the AC ratio where it's not usable. We have a 7-day assessment module, which nobody's ever done before, and throwing so we have some things that are uniquely ours and our inventions, so to speak, from a software perspective. Some of the stuff that we're working on right now, working on some of the AI models that exist with some of the AI models that exist, trying to integrate a new sensor by next year into our app. And really the ultimate goal is to kind of get a better idea to create new tools to aid the coach and player into making better decisions. So being able to ask the app, hey, what should I do throwing wise today? And having more of a dialogue versus just seeing a graph. I think those have much higher potency in terms of user experience. And so that's sort of our goal, is to continue to develop on that and build the best player training app for pitchers in the world. That's what we're trying to build.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because obviously we still use Google Drive here for all of our data tracking and stuff, and obviously there's a lot of good that comes with it. There's some stuff that's not great, but I was actually showing my GA Tyler, I was showing him the old KP profiles and like how we had it all laid out, and I mean it's just cool to see like how it was back then and how things have transpired with you guys, and literally you're using AI, which I don't even understand what that means. I understand it, but I don't understand it at the same time. So it's just awesome.
Not the buzzword AI, the actual like nuts and bolts. Like, it's so funny how many people say it. I hate saying it because it feels like I'm like telling somebody I'm doing something I'm not. It's just an organizational tool basically. So yeah, but it's funny. We're getting there.
I get it. It's just cool. It's awesome. So a couple, like, I guess good, bad, ugly of early specialization. So basically kids stop playing other sports, middle school, or even earlier, some kids are, and they're just playing baseball and they're just playing travel ball specifically. So good, bad, ugly. Is there any good? What's the bad? What's the ugly of early specialization in travel ball for any sport, but obviously in this case, baseball pitchers?
Yeah, I'd say there's more information today than there's ever been in baseball, and parents are really diving into it. Coaches really, I think many of them do mean well. The bad part is these groups have built out, like you said in my tweet the other day, like these organizations have built out these 6-game weekends, and it leaves the parents and the player trying to catch up. Exposure has been a huge thing now that people feel at 10 years old, you need to get exposure or get views. It's crazy. So, from a skill acquisition standpoint, I think we really need to go back to the basics here and really focus on, just getting kids to like have adult regulated play. And I think that's also a big part of that side of it. I won't get long-winded here, but just I think today's world, there isn't anything that allows kids to just play and to enjoy themselves. It's everything that is done after school to little league practice to game setting everything is regulated by the adult, and kids don't know how to play anymore. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I know when I was a kid, I probably got as many reps of football, basketball, baseball, tag, that unorganized as what I did organized. And I played sports year round. It's just one of those things where football practice would be over and you'd go to your buddy's house later that night and you'd be playing basketball in the yard. And like people, I just don't think number one, kids just do that as much. They're just lazy or glued to their phones, all the above. I think the travel ball thing is to an extent a scam. Scamming parents that, hey, your 10-year-old's gonna be the next great guy, and it's like he's 10. Like let's back off. I don't even like the idea of specializing as a pitcher when you're even in high school to an extent. I think if you're, we got guys on our team here that pitch, but they were just as good hitters as they were in high school as what they are pitchers now. Like, so it's one of those things where it's just wild to me. And you see it with other sports. It's not just baseball by any means. Basketball, football, some of the women's sports, soccer. I mean, we got girls that have played soccer their whole life, and that's the only sport they've ever played. And then they wonder why they've had 2 or 3 ACL injuries, or knee injuries. Weighted balls, good, bad, ugly. Usage. What's the rundown on weighted balls?
Yeah, so I really find that weighted balls give a lot of. So we use them in our philosophies. We've used them for 2 reasons in the past. I actually am going to challenge one of those philosophies because there's some new research kind of coming out that I would say one maybe doesn't happen, but two use cases, and one is undoubtedly the right way to go with it, which is a heavier weight gives you a great feedback loop. So if I have a 2-pound ball in hand, like you're going to feel where that hand is. It's easier to cue. It's easier to position yourself in those constraint drills like I talked about before. There is some train of thought that people would say that you could throw a 2-pound ball. This is something that's been around baseball for about 6-7 years now. You could throw a 2-pound ball, for example, at a lower intensity. So you're not moving as fast, but because of that weight, your arm's laying back into a deeper position. And so you're therefore training at a deeper range of motion than what you have in playing catch with a 5-ounce ball, for example. And so the idea is building strength at in range. That's what people talk about with throwing, but the amount of time that you spend in external rotation is really low. So the argument there is that we probably don't spend enough time to elicit adaptation. And so the question that's being asked right now and that we're trying to solve, and nobody has the answer to it, but is what adaptation actually occurs when we throw? What's actually happening, because we don't really spend enough time in that externally rotated position, the force happens so fast and it's so large, but it happens so fast. The question is like, what really elicits change? And we just don't know yet. So there is still some theory around like contrast training, but I think it goes back to intent. When you have somebody throwing a 3-ounce ball and they're trying to break a radar gun PR, they gain the confidence to see some higher numbers, and they find a way to kind of burst through a ceiling, self-organize a little bit, and produce velocity. There are some tangible like reasons and ways to program weighted balls. I don't think they're all bad. I think guys that have bad growth plate issues when they're young, I think guys that have had partial tears, for example, we've taken a big turn back against some of that weighted ball usage. And I think it's going to continue the pendulum's going to continue to swing back and forth for a while, until we kind of settle on, what really is the sort of induced adaptation from throwing. And that's still to be found. We don't know yet. So.
And again, I think that not only from the biomechanics and the constraint standpoint, but also just, again, the workload management. Like if you have never thrown a weighted ball before and you pick it up, or an underweighted ball even for that matter, and you pick it up and you throw 100 throws that day because your uncle told you that that's what he did when he played it, whatever, like, then you're going to it's just going to be just as detrimental as if you just went out and it's one of those things where it's all, you have to take everything into account, big picture. Nothing's necessarily good or bad. It's all kind of how you use it, and everything's a potential tool. Tyler Shorter, do you have any questions before we let Casey go?
Yeah, so you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. One of the ones I was going to ask was with Nate specifically, what are some of the things that you feel like maybe limiting factors for him in achieving whatever goals he may have, whether that be throwing 105 or health or whatever it may be?
So I think, try to answer this. There are some things I can talk about and can't talk about, so I'll be kind of maybe short on it. But Nate's got a high awareness.
Let's just say for anybody for that matter, like what is the threshold of how hard somebody can throw and sustain it? I guess that'd even be I think a better question is what is the highest that somebody can throw and do it for a sustainable period of time? Because I know people are talking about Skeens. It's just people are saying it's just a matter of time before he blows out, and it's like, why are we saying that? What can he do to prevent it? Like, what is that upper echelon, and how do we maintain it?
Yeah, so I think, again, kind of going back to a workload standpoint, like your body is able to adapt and uniquely creates, change over time to handle those upper echelons. So if you can find ways to drive intent, still push yourself kind of at that higher threshold. I tell guys all the time, if you want to be a faster sprinter, you have to sprint, right? So if you want to be a harder thrower, you have to throw harder. It's just part of it. And so managing good workload, like taking into effect, what it is that you're, doing from a output standpoint and having some sort of base calculation for it. Again, our workload calculations, they aren't perfect, but they're a bigger step in the right direction for us for the long term. Once we kind of know the adaptations, the throwing that I was talking about before, it's gonna be a lot easier for us to retune these workload calculations to fit that model a lot better. And so I'd say we just don't know. Like I'd say, like, we take our best guesses at guys like Nate, for example, and say like, hey, he's got a huge ceiling. That he could continue to maybe improve, or he may not. He might be hitting, the peak of what he physically can do. And then that's also to say that each individual has unique tissue. So like, what can somebody really withstand? Who knows? Like, we just don't have enough. Things like ultrasound today are providing a lot of feedback and insight as to who's who when we look at individuality. But are you going to take a bunch of 10-year-olds and put them on a table and ultrasound their elbows before they play Little League baseball? Like, probably not. So I think that's just kind of the reality. Is there's a lot that we don't know today. There's some new advances in technology that are pushing us closer to understanding. But in terms of what guys can do, I think guys that are at the big league level are willing to take those risks today in ways they never have. So I think you'll find guys like Nate. That's one thing that he's really embraced over the years is, I'll keep pushing to find new opportunities, new ways to hack things that are new technologies or new philosophies. And, some guys that never ends. Some guys may find that they throw 105 one day. Skeen seems to be that kind of guy. He seems to kind of want to push the fold a little bit to improve himself. So. You're muted again, Matt. Adam.
Sorry, shorter. Anything else? I agree with you on that, all that, in terms of just certain guys are just might be willing more to take that risk. Other guys, it's, you know, and again, that's where you see freaks in a lot of, you see freaks like in a lot of settings. And it's one of those things where a lot of times, and this goes back to just the injury aspect too, is, you know, there's guys that make it to the NFL and they have literally a surgery every single offseason just so they can go back and play 18 more games. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where they wouldn't have gotten there if they weren't freaks, but also because of the freaky abilities that they have, they're also more prone to having freakish injuries too. So it's one of those things where there's a cost to everything. But Tyler, do you have any other questions?
Right.
Yeah, going on the KP sleeve, is that measuring strictly workload, or is there other data that it's collecting?
Yeah, so we actually nixed the KP sleeve about a month ago. So we removed that from our package. We are releasing a new sensor coming up in the next calendar year. Yeah, that was just collecting workload outputs. We were not using it as a biomechanics tool. And I think anybody that does use a wearable technology as a biomechanics tool is grossly mistaken on the capabilities of what we have from an IMU at this standpoint. So.
And I remember.
So is that including like, sorry.
I was gonna say, I remember back, that's initially what Modus was kind of saying. And I know when we were working with Modus, they were kind of backtracking a little bit and be like, all right, this is really probably just more measuring kind of some arm speed and more of a workload thing. It's not really, you can't for sure say that it's measuring torque or stress and all the above. I mean, there's probably a little bit there and a little bit that's left to be, you're guessing a little bit, but go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah. And that's what, like, I had a call with, I forget the name of the place, but it was in like South Jordan, Utah, and they were one of the first biomech labs. I think the first people doing biomechanical analysis, and that was something that they were saying was like, if you're wearing, if it's not wearable tech, or you're not marking every position on a on a motionless or markerless, it's not going to be super accurate when it comes to that kind of stuff. But yeah, I had seen the KP sleeve, I think ABCA 2021 or 22 was when I went down, and I had stopped by your booth and saw the sleeve. So I didn't know how that had advanced in the past couple of years, but.
Yeah, the tech didn't get us where we wanted it to be. It wasn't accurate enough, and the company I was partnering with in it did some dirty stuff. I won't get into that today. But to your point of like markerless versus like the sensor type stuff, the idea, the big issue you run into, markerless today is very powerful. And because of the AI models that we have, things can be trained very quickly, and it's much different than it was 5 years ago. So you can find like joint segments, you can look at the middle, they can find the middle of a joint pretty easy on an athlete, and they can be sub-millimeter accurate in terms of, especially with the 12 camera systems, things like Kinetrax and Qualisys and all of that exist. But when we talk about wearable tech, we're using inverse dynamics to try to predict where the elbow is. So they'll use height, and they'll use inverse dynamics to try to find the elbow, and then they'll say, oh, that's the middle of the elbow. And so when you're talking about valgus torque, for example, if we're trying to pin the middle of the elbow and we're trying to put a marker on that middle of the elbow, one, I actually have to have the segment length. And then two, if that sensor is moving at all, I'm not going to create the middle of that segment. I'm not going to find it. So reality is, again, what are these wearable technologies good for? Well, they can track internal rotation really well. They can track total speed. So the accelerometer and the gyroscope, they do pick up movement very, very well. We're trying to tune that to sub-millimeter accuracy. It's not about sub-millimeter accuracy. It's about just getting an idea of a general, like, what to do or what you've done for the day. And that's what our software and the hardware actually kind of work toward.
So I would assume then that, like, in your mind, like the one I had considered going to with my pitchers as we take steps towards doing biomechanical analysis and motion capture type stuff, I had looked into the 3D motion. I think, does that sound right? 3D motion, but that's marker.
3D motion.
Casey,
I can tell you if you
it
send
may
it to
be
me,
4D, but I can send it through.
Casey, can you elaborate on
Can
you elaborate on the 3Motion AI? Is that something that's downloadable like that? is pretty affordable, or I mean, is it like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's like $200 a year, and it's way better than 4D. Yes, 4D is they use notch sensors, or they have in the past, which are just sensor based notch. They're little wearable tech notch pieces you put straps on, and they'll claim it's marker, but if it's not like Qualisys type markers where you're paying for like lab grade sensors or markers, then it's probably not worth it. 3Motion AI is a single camera system, so there are limitations to that, but if you're just training pitchers, it saves you from having to buy a $100,000 lab and set that up and run MATLAB and spend all the hours doing all the stuff. 3Motion AI is, I think it's like, I think it was like 0.87 was like from their research papers, I want to say, that they ran on it. Like they had a pretty high confidence in its comparison to a lab. So you are sacrificing some quality, but again, what you're getting back in terms of usability, like you don't have to strip the athlete into their boxers. You don't have to put the markers on them. You don't have to put them in one spot. You can just rip your phone out, take a video wherever they are, and track what they do. That's super, super powerful. And I would recommend that to any coach, especially getting started in biomechanics. Like, again, I'm a little biased. I'm part owner in the company, so let's specify that. But it is a lot better than trying to spend a couple $1,000s on something and then, really, not have the accuracy or have the same accuracy, let's say. I just think the single camera systems, especially with 3Motion, probably your best bet to getting started in all of it.
Is Nate Pearson still part of 3Motion as well?
Yeah, he's he is the poster child for it. He's an investor in it. So
yeah, that's what I thought. So I mean, that's obviously, if you got somebody like that that's willing to put their name behind it, it's probably somewhat solid. And I know that was something that was just starting. You guys were kind of just getting into that as I was on my way out. So I'm gonna kind of stop it here, just because I know I wanted to try to keep you to an hour. We ran over, which is completely fine. Really appreciate your time, Casey. Super. I mean, proud's a weird thing to say because we're the same age, so it's weird to like say you're proud of somebody that you're like the same age as or something.
No, it's great, dude.
Obviously, I'm just proud of just like that. Honestly, that I've getting like I love having KP on my resume, because as you guys grow like that, 7 years ago it didn't mean much on my resume, but now as people are starting to get aware of it, like it means something. So it's just one of those things where like it makes me happy that you guys are killing it and kind of growing and making an influence on not just the pitching world, but the baseball world, and also to an extent just the performance world in general. So it's awesome. Appreciate you being on here. What's all your guys' social media? Kinetic Pro at everything, is it?
Yeah. So, and first off, Adam, wouldn't be here without you. So appreciate you as always, and happy to see you doing well, and hopefully everybody here is enjoying the conversation today. So, but no, so it's kineticprobaseball.com. Kineticprobaseball.com is our website. So kineticprobaseball.com. Our Instagram is at kineticproperformance, and then Twitter is at kinetic_pro. And then my personal Twitter, which is where I'm typically firing things all from. If you're looking for like, a non-filtered, non-company facing, just unfettered, performance discussion, that's my Twitter. And it's at Casey Mulholland 37, I believe. But yeah, that's happy to interact with any of you guys and talk to you guys through. It's just actually, sorry, at Casey Mulholland. So anyways, happy to interact with any of you guys. You guys have questions, feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me at casey@kineticprobaseball.com as an email. Happy to talk to you guys offline and chat more about anything that might be of interest. So happy to be a resource any way I can.
All right, man. It's great talking to you. Great catching up. Hopefully we'll do it again at some point in time, and I appreciate it.
All right, guys. Talk soon. Thanks.
See ya.